Hello, and welcome to the Focal Point Strategy and Solutions Center focusing on unified messaging, sponsored by AVST. I'm Carmi Levy, Senior Research Analyst with Infotech Research Group. Within this site, you'll find a variety of resources to bring you up to speed on the benefits of unified messaging, including the latest news, case studies, white papers, and a series of short video programs produced by AVST and ITworld.com. In our final segment, Hardy Myers, President and CEO of AVST, tells us why we don't need to toss out our existing telephony infrastructure in order to implement unified messaging, as well as how education and training are so critical to the success of unified messaging. Hardy, like all new technologies, unified messaging comes with its own fair share of assumptions, many of them false. I think the first one that I hear from IT managers when I speak to them is that it won't work with what I've got. I'm going to have to rip out everything that I have, lock, stock, and barrel to put in unified messaging. How do you respond to that? What's the real truth here?
Well, that's just not true. We, for example, AVST, we've been doing unified messaging for over 10 years in virtually any groupware environment with virtually any telephony environment. So the answer is you don't need to wait till you have a full IP telephony environment to be able to deploy unified messaging, and you don't need to deploy it across your entire enterprise to start getting the productivity and the capabilities of it for critical segments of your workforce that can get value for it today. So it doesn't have to be this huge multi-million-dollar entire telephony and enterprise communications infrastructure project. You can get going now.
So drawing that initial line in the sand for a typical organization, what would it look like for them to get started? What's typically the first piece for an organization to proceed with?
Right, so that takes you back to some of the conversation we had before, which is most enterprises today have to move off of their legacy platforms, their legacy call processing and voicemail platforms, typically an Octel, a VMX, a Centigram, an Audix, et cetera. And what they want to do when they do that is they want to be asking for a UM-capable system. When they get a UM-capable system, the most important thing for them at that point, given, as I mentioned, the fact that they want to deploy UM to a certain segment of their workforce where they can get the most productivity, they want to make sure that they can add unified messaging on what I call an a la carte basis. That is, deploy it to a segment of the workforce today. Some of the other hidden value that they see when they get a UM-capable system, most enterprises find out is that they're very inefficient in their faxing. So there's always some great productivity enhancement with moving to a software-based faxing model. You would not believe how many enterprises I see that have that. And then clearly adding a speech component, whether it's on the front end of their business, so to have a much more effective interface for the inbound customers calling and simply saying a person's name, or on the outbound, meaning from the mobile worker standpoint, having a hands-free interface. It makes it very efficient and effective for a mobile worker like myself to basically be as effective as if I was at my desktop. So today, I can do everything I do at my desktop via a hands-free interface in my car while I'm driving.
So this doesn't have to be overly costly or complex to implement up front, does it?
No, it's actually very reasonable, particularly relative to the mindset of, I would say, enterprise telecom and IT personnel for what they paid for their original Octel systems, as an example.
And you can build a pretty good business case based on ROI?
Generally, yeah. I mean, unified messaging, certain aspects of unified messaging there's a very good ROI. Certain parts there aren't, but I can tell you, I have never met an enterprise that put a unified messaging system in that didn't say that it was a major productivity enhancer for the business. In fact, most enterprises that we talk to, if you survey them post-installation, they would say, I can't believe we waited as long as we did.
So where the rubber hits the road, obviously, is with the all-important end user. And we've seen technologies that can be made or broken based on how they play at the end user level.
Right.
How do you get end users on board? What are the training requirements for something like this? How do you proceed? Where do you start?
Well, my first advice always is to do more training, not less. We see a lot of enterprises not scrimp on training, but underestimate the training requirements in general for any new technology. So my advice is always to consider training as a critical component of any technology transition. That being said, when you're talking about enterprises moving from a large legacy system to a new system, one of the biggest issues is the interface. And for most of the workforce, they're going to be going to the same interface they had before and then really getting ready to move towards unified messaging over the next 2 or 3 years. And so having an interface that mimics or emulates that legacy interface is a critical component, I think, in the evaluation process of a second generation solution. And in our case, with our Call Express product, we support several of the legacy interfaces. Some of the other vendors have some interface emulation capabilities, but that's an important factor. And I've seen it work fabulously with large customers transitioning, literally thousands of workers in a very short period of time with a relatively small amount of training and not a lot of pushback. Number one nightmare for an IT department is to have 10,000 people calling them on Monday morning and asking how to, what number button do I have to press to save a voicemail, things like that. So we've tried to take that. I think as an industry in general, we've tried to eliminate some of those barriers and impediments to enterprises moving forward and taking advantage of the new technology.
And speaking of barriers, a lot of the companies that I speak to as an analyst are very concerned about transitioning their infrastructure, their critical voice applications over to a technology that they're not familiar with. So I guess as we close for the day, what are the kinds of things that you tell them to help overcome those misgivings about barriers to adoption?
Well, good example is, the traditional systems were all on proprietary operating systems, proprietary hardware. And, we've been doing server-based communication solutions for almost 25 years, or a little bit more than 25 years, I guess, at this point. And so, we're very comfortable in that space. We have literally thousands of systems running on servers all over the world. And so I guess the number one thing I would say is you don't need to be fearful of that transition. It works well. We've got thousands of cases to point to it, and very, very, very high reliability.
So Hardy, we've already decided you're a company, you're going to move into unified messaging as a first step, and then the second is you're going to look at integrating this into your legacy applications, make sure that you build on the functionality that you already have. Third, you might be an organization that is now looking at a telephony infrastructure that is approaching end of life, and you will be moving into IP telephony. Right. So what are the implications of now building out that fundamental infrastructure of IP telephony with unified messaging on top of it?
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, an earlier segment about interoperability. I mean, this is a critical piece of the puzzle as far as I'm concerned. Many enterprises are in a transition state with their telephony infrastructure today. Some are holding strong and they're saying we're not going to replace our infrastructure for a while. Some are actually doing it now, and some have already done it. So the point is, and by the way, even though they've already done it, that may change as well because new technology may come out. They may do an acquisition that has different technology, meaning a different IP telephony brand as an example. And so interoperability, I believe, not only today is critical, but will remain a critical issue in the future. So when you're looking at solutions, that this is a critical evaluation criteria as far as I'm concerned. We see many enterprises straddling both digital and IP telephony environments, and so they want to have a solution that can enable them to move from one to the other. And this is an area where, in our case, with our product, that's one of our core focal points, is to enable enterprises to move, to be ready to move, or to enable them to move to an IP telephony environment or whenever they so choose. About 2/3 to 3/4 of the enterprises we talk to and work with are moving over from traditional telephony to IP telephony over time. In other words, a hybrid environment where they have some workers that are using traditional telephony environment for some period of time, and then some that are working, that are using the IP telephony now and in the future.
So it's safe to say then that the end game of all of this technology is that we want companies to look at their business and focus on their business instead of their telephony technology.
Focus on a better business, not a better infrastructure. That's our advice.
Sounds like a compelling business case to me. Thanks so much for joining us today. So on behalf of AVST, thanks for joining us.